You know, when you think of an American tank in World War II, your mind probably jumps straight to the M4 Sherman. But the real story of U.S. armor development? Oh, it's way more complicated than just one tank. It's a tale of desperate improvisation, brutal lessons learned on the battlefield, and this fierce debate happening at the highest levels of command, all boiling down to one single crucial question. Is it better to have a whole lot of good tanks or just a few great ones? This is the story of that choice.
And for the soldiers on the ground, guys like Tanker Bill Harris, this wasn't some abstract strategic debate. No way. This was life and death. The promises they heard back in training camps, while they often shattered against the cold, hard reality of combat in Europe, they found themselves in a technological arms race that, sometimes, they were very clearly losing.
So, how did we even get to this point? We're going to trace the story right from the beginning. We'll start with the shock that forced America's hand. Look at the weird and kind of wonderful stopgap tanks they came up with. Chart the rise of the legendary Sherman. Unpack the secret arguments that kept it on the front lines. And finally, witness the arrival of the heavyweight that showed up to even the odds.
Okay, so before America was even officially in the war, it got a massive wake-up call. The fall of France in 1940 happened so fast, and it made one thing painfully clear. Germany's Panzer tanks were a whole generation ahead of what the Allies had. America's main tank at the time, the M2 Medium, was basically obsolete before it ever saw a real fight. They needed a new, more powerful tank, and they needed it like yesterday.
This crisis led to one of the most, unusual-looking tanks of the entire war, the M3. You might know it as the Lee if you're American or the Grant if you're British. Now, let's be clear. This wasn't the tank America wanted to build, not at all, but it was the tank it could build fast. The goal was super simple: get a powerful 75mm cannon onto the battlefield as quickly as humanly possible.
And this is where the design gets, just plain weird. You can see the compromise right here. To save time on designing a new turret, the engineers literally bolted the main gun onto the side of the tank's body. That meant the entire tank had to pivot just to aim its main weapon. It was awkward, it was tall, making it a super easy target. But hey, it had the big gun the Allies desperately needed.
In its first major battles in North Africa, the M3's flaws were just brutally exposed. At Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, U.S. forces learned a terrible lesson. That tall profile, it was a perfect target for the legendary German 88mm guns. And even worse, its armor was riveted together. When a shell hit, it wouldn't just punch a hole, it would send those red-hot rivets flying around inside the tank like deadly shrapnel. Soviet tankers who also got the M3 gave it a grim nickname, a grave for six brothers.
But here's the twist. You take that very same tank, put it in a different theater against a totally different enemy, and suddenly it's a war winner. Over in Burma, the M3 Grant completely dominated the battlefield. Why? Because Japanese tanks were smaller, with weaker guns and thinner armor. Against them, the M3's big 75mm cannon was absolutely devastating. It's a perfect example of how a tank's effectiveness is always relative to what it's fighting.
All right, let's move on to the tank that would come to define American armored forces, the M4 Sherman. This was the tank designed to fix the M3's biggest problem. It took that powerful 75mm gun and put it where it belonged, in a fully rotating turret. This was the tank America was about to build on a truly epic scale. Just look at that number. Almost 50,000 Shermans. 48,000 of them rolled off American assembly lines. This wasn't just a tank. It was a symbol of America's insane industrial might. The ability to build, ship, and maintain that many vehicles was a strategic weapon all by itself. Quantity in this case really did have a quality all its own.
But on the battlefields of Normandy, that quantity ran headfirst into superior German quality. This chart, it's from a wartime report, and it shows the problem in really stark terms. See the lines on the left? Those are the German guns. The ones on the right are Allied. You can see that the Panther and Tiger tanks could punch right through Allied armor from way over 1,000 yards away. At that same range, the Sherman 75mm gun was pretty much useless against their thick frontal armor.
And that chart? That wasn't just data on a page, that was the terrifying lived experience for thousands of tank crews. They were told their tanks were the best in the world, and then they found out the truth in the hedgerows of France. It often took 4 or even 5 Shermans working together to take down a single Panther or Tiger, and a lot of American tankers paid the ultimate price in those lopsided duels.
So this brings up the obvious question. If the Army knew the Sherman was outgunned, Why on earth did they keep sending men to fight in it? Well, the answer lies in this fierce, behind-the-scenes debate that pitted the reality of the battlefield against established military doctrine.
Okay, so on one side you had Lieutenant General Devers. He saw the new German heavy tanks and argued, hey, we need to build our own heavy tank to fight them one-on-one. Makes sense, right? But on the other, more powerful side was Lieutenant General McNair. He was the architect of what was called the tank-destroyer doctrine. He believed that tanks shouldn't fight other tanks. Nope, their job was to support infantry. To kill enemy tanks, the Army had these specialized, fast, lightly armored vehicles called, you guessed it, tank destroyers. McNair insisted that just putting a better gun on the Sherman was enough, and for a long time, his view won the argument.
The absolutely brutal losses in Normandy finally broke that doctrinal stalemate. The evidence was just overwhelming. America needed a heavy tank, and it needed it now. The answer was a vehicle that had actually been in development for years, the T-26, which would soon be known as the M26 Persian.
This timeline really just shows you how frustrating the whole thing was. Development started way back in 1942. General Devers was practically begging for them in 1943. But because of all that internal debate, it wasn't until the bloody proof from Normandy came flooding in that the project was finally put on the fast track. The first handful of Pershings, just 20 of them, only reached the front lines in the final months of the war in Europe. And when it finally did arrive, boy did it make an impact. The scene is Cologne, Germany. The city is in ruins. American forces are fighting their way towards that famous cathedral you see in all the pictures.
Suddenly, out of the shadows, a German Panther tank opens fire. It hits a Sherman. The tank is knocked out instantly. 3 crew members are killed. Just like that, the Panther has shown why it's so feared.
But this time, there's something new on the field. Further down the street, the crew of an M26 Pershing spots the Panther. This is the moment they've all been waiting for, a chance to finally fight the Germans on equal terms. The Pershing's massive 90mm gun barks. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3 shots. The Panther, which had seemed so invincible just moments before, erupts in a ball of fire. The duel is over. The Pershing had proven its point, decisively.
And the ultimate test? That came about a month later. A specially modified Super Pershing with an even bigger gun faced off against the most feared German tank of all, the King Tiger. The fight lasted just 20 seconds. The Super Pershing fired a single shot that tore right through the Tiger's hull, causing a catastrophic explosion. The American heavyweight was the new undisputed champion.
So, all of this brings us right back to that central question. The Pershing was clearly the better tank, no doubt about it. But does that mean the strategy of mass-producing the Sherman was the wrong one?
When you look at the whole picture, the Sherman was, in the end, good enough. It could be shipped across the ocean by the thousands, it was mechanically reliable, and its gun worked just fine against most targets. The German tanks, on the other hand, were engineering marvels, but they were complex, they broke down all the time, and they were built in tiny numbers. The Pershing really was the best of both worlds, but it was a solution that arrived far too late for the vast majority of American tankers who fought and ultimately won the war in their trusty Shermans.
Ultimately, the Allied strategy of quantity worked. The sheer number of Shermans, combined with overwhelming air power and artillery, simply buried the German army. But that victory came at a terrible cost in lives and machines, and that leaves us with a really difficult question. Given the thousands of crews who were lost in those mismatched duels, was a victory won by numbers truly the best way to do it? That's something historians and soldiers will be debating for a long time.